Good morning, everyone. We're going to get the forum started, but before we do, we have a word.
No, you gotta be louder.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning,
yes.
Simon.
We're going to get started, but before we do, we're going to have a word.
Advertisement. My name is Ray Carpenter. I'm a senior fellow with the Association of the United States Army, and it's my pleasure or privilege to do today's panel introduction for the seminar for the Chief of the Army Reserve. This year, AUSA went past the 1 million membership mark. Phenomenal landmark, actually. So if you are not a member of AUSA, you're on the outside. So what you have to do is you got to go down the AUSA booth and sign up and become a member of this great organization. This forum is a great opportunity to hear from the senior leadership of the Army Reserve, and the Association of the United States Army is proud to be able to have Lieutenant General Jody Daniels and her panelists. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Simon Flake from the Army Reserve Strategic Communications, and I have the distinct privilege of introducing our host, distinguished panel members, and our dynamic moderator. But before we get into our discussion on integrating civilian skills into the future fight, we're going to take a look at a video that's going to fire you up.
Now, more than ever, America needs a powerful and resilient force, ready to deliver vital capabilities. Today's Army Reserve draws its talent from all 50 states and 5 U.S. territories, serving in 20 time zones around the world and around the clock. You see us every day, 180,000 citizen soldiers, blending seamlessly into your communities. We are your doctors, your teachers, your mechanics. We are your neighbors. We are your family. On any given day, more than 10,000 Army Reserve soldiers are deployed worldwide, while another 10,000 provide support across the entire DoD. Through tough and realistic training done safely, we are empowering our soldiers to be their best in and out of uniform. As they learn, train, and grow, they bring their purpose and passion to employees across thousands of communities around the globe. Our soldiers are tough, prepared physically and mentally, with a desire to serve their country now and lead troops into the fight of tomorrow. In an ever-changing landscape of both visible and invisible threats, we stand ready to defeat our enemies, anytime, anywhere. America's Army Reserve is ready now, shaping tomorrow.
General Jody J. Daniels, the 34th Chief of Army Reserve and 9th Commanding General of the United States Army Reserve Command. General Daniels leads the largest 3-star command in the Army with more than 200,000 soldiers and civilians and a footprint that encompasses all 50 states, 5 territories, and a presence in more than 23 countries across the globe. In her civilian career, Dr. Daniels was the director of advanced programs for Lockheed Martin's Advanced Technology Laboratories and also served as a manager and engineer in Lockheed's Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. She supported the Defense Advanced Research Programs Agency's Information Science and Technology Review Board and sat on Drexel University's Computer Science Department Advisory Board. General Daniels holds a Bachelor of Science in Applied Mathematics from Carnegie Mellon University, a Master of Science and Doctor of Philosophy in Computer Science from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and a Master of Science in Strategic Studies from the United States Army War College. Ma'am, over to you.
All right, thank you, Simon. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you all here this morning. I'm glad you're all joining us today. Thank you, General Carpenter. I'm not sure if you're still here, but he's a great man, great human, has done great things for us. I also want to we have an amazing panel this morning. I'm kind of excited. I'm talking really fast because it's a great panel. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and we hope to get you all involved in this conversation that we're talking about. So General Dickerson is going to be our moderator, integrating civilian skills into the future fight. And before we start, I've already thanked AUSA. They're going to have that great discussion. So what are we talking about? What's our point of being here? So we're currently in the midst of one of our significant transformations, and it's quite a bit as we've come from our worrying about insurgents, and now we're getting that large-scale combat operations. We're looking to 2030, 2040, our way ahead. So crucial to that is all the changes that we're seeing, our innovations in science, technology, engineering, as we look at that multi-domain fight of the future. And what we're seeing is lots of emergent technologies, rapid innovation. We've got things like AI, machine learning, cyber, robotics. A lot of these have civilian applications that we'd like to see come over to the military domain in order to enable our success. So the war in Ukraine gave us some insights, some opportunities to gather some observations of what could and might be useful. And we're looking at these evolutions of emerging technologies, along with the changes of their use and the employment of new skill sets out on the battlefield. So this transformation requires that we seek alternate pathways to adapt how we think about and leverage these emergent civilian skill sets, particularly as we look at this future fight. So today's panel is to explore how do we integrate those skill sets? How do we more rapidly integrate them? How do we acquire them? How do we bring that talent from the civilian workforce into the military? How do we retain it? How do we leverage it to great use? And so we've got a great panel here, and I will let you all, I don't know if I'm passing you back to you to introduce I'm excited. Okay, I'll stop now.
Yes, ma'am. Fired up.
Can you match that, Simon? You got this?
I don't know if I can, sir.
All right, just want to make sure.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I'll introduce our distinguished panel. First, we'll start with Lieutenant General Christopher Donahue, who currently serves as the 39th Commander of the 18th Airborne Corps in Fort Liberty, North Carolina. Prior to assuming command of the Corps, General Donahue served as the commander of the 82nd Airborne Division. General Donahue's other assignments include Commander, NATO Special Operations Component, and U.S. Joint Special Operations in support of Operations Freedom Sentinel. General Donahue led soldiers at all levels in Airborne Ranger, Light, and Mechanized units to include service with 3 divisions, the 75th Ranger Regiment and USASOC. He has 20 deployments in support of operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, North Africa, and Eastern Europe. General Donahue is a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point and was commissioned in 1992. His military education includes the Infantry Officer Basic and Advanced courses, the Naval War College, and the U.S. Army War College Fellowship at Harvard University. Beside Lieutenant General Donahue is Major General Simon Graham, the Director of Reserves for the British Army. General Grahams joined the Queen's Own Yeomanry in 1985 as a trooper while at university. He commissioned into the Territorial Army in 1986 and into the Regular Army in 1988. He served with 1420 King's Hussars in Germany on operations in the Gulf, twice in Northern Ireland, and twice in Bosnia. Finishing as adjutant, he left regular service in 1998 to start a new career in the Scotch whiskey industry.
All right.
Returning to the Army as a reservist, General Graham spent several years at Joint Services Command and Staff College as teaching directing staff in XO before commanding the Queen's Own Yeomanry in 2009. After command, he was seconded to the Army 2020 study team before a series of policy jobs. He attended Royal College of Defense Studies in 2015 to 2016. 2018, he became Deputy Commander of Reserves, Headquarters 1 UK Division, before moving back to the Army headquarters as a Director of Reserves in November of 2020. General Graham studied history at Durham University and has a postgraduate Master's in Business Administration from Strathclyde Business School. In 2023, he was appointed Companion of the Most Honorable Order of the Bath for being the driving force at the very center of transforming the Army's reserve forces. Continuing, Mr. Brent Parmeter, was appointed as the inaugural Chief Talent Management Officer for the U.S. Department of Defense in April 2023. In this role, he works across the military departments, Joint Staff, Office of the Secretary of Defense, and with interagency partners to lead the development and implementation of the DoD Total Force Talent Acquisition, Workforce Development, and Talent Management Strategy. Prior to joining the DoD, Mr. Parmeter was the head of non-traditional talent and military and veterans affairs and led STEM and military programs at Walmart. He's an Army combat veteran with nearly 25 years of service before retiring as a colonel. After the Army, Brent co-founded and grew several different companies in California in the technology and manufacturing sectors, including NextFlex, an advanced manufacturing innovation institute focused on the development of flexible hybrid electronics. He was also a principal and then partner in BMNT Incorporated, a California-based consulting company, and served as a Science and Technology Policy Fellow for the U.S. Department of Energy. In 2017, he was selected to serve as the first civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army for Silicon Valley. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the United States Military Academy, master's degrees from Louisiana State University and the Army War College, and a graduate certificate in entrepreneurship and innovation from the Stanford University Graduate School of Business. Rounding out our panelists, Mr. Kenneth Cushing is the Chief Executive Officer and Vice Chairman of the Board of Directors of NetCentrics, a large cybersecurity cloud and digital transformation company. Currently a colonel in the U.S. Air Force Reserves, Kenny has over 27 years of diverse business leadership, management consulting, and military experience across the private sector, Department of Defense, intelligence community, and federal civilian agencies. Additionally, he is an elected member of the Board of Directors of the National Defense Industrial Association and is a member of Business Executives for National Security. And last, but certainly not least, our dynamic moderator for today is Brigadier General Kelly Dickerson. General Dickerson currently serves as the Office of the Chief of Army Reserve G357 in Fort Belvoir, Virginia. He previously served as the Deputy Commanding General for the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School, Special Operations Center of Excellence at Fort Liberty, North Carolina. In his civilian capacity, General Dickerson is Vice President and Head of Global Seller Risk Platforms for PayPal and has served with several financial technology firms across various banking, venture capital, and software as a service technology platforms. His passion for offering underserved consumers value-based products has provided a very diverse experience in consumer risk-based analytics integrated with novel technology applications. General Dickerson holds a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from Virginia Polytechnical and State University and a Master of Science in Strategic Studies from the United States Army War College. Over to you, General Dickerson.
All right, here we go. All right, for some of you may not know this. These on? Can you all hear me back there? Awesome. I'm a Hokie, so we tend to do things a little differently, and I'm going to call an audible right away because I got 6 stars around me and they're raring to go. So instead of a long introduction here, I'd like to just jump to what we're going to get in today. So for the first part of this panel, we want to talk about how do we lay a solid foundation for understanding our future requirements, and how does that really come back to the civilian component that we can bring in. What I want to do is I'm going to hand it over to General Donahue, who I know is ready to go, wants to talk about some cool things. So he mentioned a word today. I'm going to throw this at you, sir. Please don't hit me. Superpower. Talk to me more about superpower.
So the first thing is just listen to everyone's bio up here. Okay, and I look out and I see General Klein, Gene LaBeouf, my next door neighbor, who is a doctorate, and watches me with my 5 kids every day, try to put together like something that's really simple. And he goes, God, is this guy dumb? just look at everyone's bio, though.
And then look at my bio. My bio sucks compared to yours. I mean, and I don't mean that. I mean, I'm about as one-dimensional, and I've had a very diverse Army career, right? We're super diverse for an active duty person. But if you were to compare my bio to any of your bios, man, I am monolithic, right? So this goes back to the superpower, right? And whenever people ask me about the reserves, hey, what is this reserves? What's National Guard? Like, what's the difference? And I said, well, the reserves bring superpowers. And they're like, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, I'm a one-star general. I grew up in the SOF, so I don't really know anything about the reserves or National Guard other than the air portion of it, right? And so I'm out running Atlantic Resolve. And we do this giant exercise down in Romania and Bulgaria. And we're moving like 50-some thousand people through all these areas. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be a nightmare. How are we going to do this and not irritate everybody, right? And they said, sir, it's really easy. You got these civil affairs people that are going to be part of this. And I was like, oh, okay, great. So the active duty person comes in from civil affairs, and it's like, I don't know about this. I'm not real comfortable with these guys. And then this two reservists come in, husband and wife, and they're lobbyists on the Hill for the railroad. And these two and the rest of those reserve teams, anywhere we went in Southeast Europe, everybody knew them. They solved every problem. And candidly, the active duty folks, who I love, I wouldn't let them anywhere near it. Okay, and think about it. We live on a base. We put our walls up. We interact with society even less. Who doesn't? Look at our bios, right? So when I look out and I see Marty Klein, what 75th Innovation Command does, right? When I look at all these capabilities that you all can bring. I mean, we're now at the point when it comes to, anyone's ever heard me talk, I thought, hey, we got to be able to adapt and integrate. Well, what does that really mean? How does your organization actually flex, build, scale up to what it needs to be? General Daniels just talked about it, right? How do you bring in all these things? Who are the people that can actually adapt and integrate and bring these capabilities to you? You all. Whirlpool used to make mortar tubes. We'll talk about the great days of World War II, which were very important. We're at that point right now where the things that we need to add to our formations, we're not the experts, nor do we even build those things anymore, right? You all do. The best people who do great at this are people who have a passion for the military, but they're tech experts, right? That's you. Look at Jody Daniels' bio. Every time I hear her bio, I'm like, don't ask me the tech question, ask her it, right? I mean, that is your superpower that you will bring, okay? And you will show up with incredible capability just off your bio. Use it. Use it for good and drive it. You have so much capability. The only thing I would tell you is, and this is true for National Guard and active, but active has to drive it. Make us all work together more, right? If I could make Marty Klein DCG 18th Airborne Corps for Reserve, I would do it today. By the way, I have a National Guard DCG now. I would have him do it because we want what he has, right? If I could put them on our MTO, I would do it today, right? I know your boss won't ever allow that to happen. Form in and force the active duty people to look up and integrate us. That's your superpower.
I just want to say, so for those who don't know, the 75th Innovation Command is full of technologists in a variety of different areas, medical as well as all the different STEM fields. And so we harness them as sort of our scouts out, and they do a lot of experimentation across the force. They work for Futures Command directly. So they're integrated there with General Rainey and his team. And so the driving, look at 2030, 2040, where we headed. So Marty and his team are out doing a lot of that tech exploitation and integration into the force.
Hey, and then don't forget about your traditional stuff. You all do too. I mean, don't think that I'm not thinking about that kid. I see Jamie Shawley out there, who's been the Horn of Africa for about 18 months now, doing your traditional stuff. You have formations out there that we all rely on as well. So don't think that I've forgotten about that. I know what else you do of that, largest 3-star command in the Army. So don't think that I'm not thinking about that. We do as well.
Sir, thanks for that. Hey, so this is going to be more of a conversation, so you're going to have me shift a little bit here and there, and I promise we're going to leave time for questions from the audience, because I know you guys want to get involved as well. But General Graham, I want to go with you a little bit here. Besides the fact that you thought I was in the Navy today, which really hurts because I told you I went down to the recruiter to go to enlist in the Navy, and they were at the lunch, and that's why I'm in the Army. Talk to me more about your situation, because you've developed the Army Reserve you have today. But what areas are you looking to in the civilian sector, and how do you bring that in?
I should say that just to soften the blow, in the United Kingdom we are of course an island, and therefore in the United Kingdom it won't have escaped anyone's notice, but we are an island, and therefore the senior service is the Royal Navy. So it was something of a compliment.
So you're saying I got a chance, right? All right, just making sure. I'm going to London in 2 weeks, so we'll find out.
So I mean, I guess my first sort of observation is in sort of understanding the problem statement that we face the same sorts of issues here. We have let's say a declining in terms of headcount regular component. Regular workforce costs are only going to increase, and therefore the availability of active regular workforce is going to become more and more scarce, and that is a trend that I don't think is going to change. So what does that mean? And it's compounded, I think, also by an army in the UK that is concentrating into fewer places on the ground, into larger bases, and increasingly invisible. So that puts a burden on the reserve component in the UK in various ways, not just in delivering capability of a conventional kind, of the kind that we would recognize deployable warfighting capability, but also the soft stuff, the engagement with the country, with representation, and those links with society, with academia, with education, with industry, and all of that is increasingly a reserves job. So we're having to adapt to that new reality, and I think we're adapting slowly because we live underneath a sort of regular-centric cultural umbrella, if I can put it like that. We're slowly adapting our attitude to structures, policy, and all of those ways that we can accommodate non-regular, non-active elements into the force. And that is our challenge at the moment.
So I want to switch a little bit there, so thanks for that. And we're going to talk more about those challenges because we think about how do we bring some of that civilian skill sets into our military. Most of us have that standard enlist, get a commission, come in, go through up to a year or more of training, and then we go to implement. And yet in some of these skills, these folks coming in, they already have the skill. We're looking to train them where they can actually train us. So I do want to go to Mr. Parmeter. So from the DoD's perspective, what are the challenges you're seeing, and how do we balance that with policy and program such that we can attract and recruit some of the best talent from the civilian sector into our military?
Yeah, thank you. I would say, so tomorrow is 6 months into the job, and the Deputy Secretary and the Secretary said, come in, do a review, then build a strategy, then oversee the implementation of that strategy, and obviously in a consensus-based way. And about week 2 into the job, the Deputy said, don't do all those in sequence, do them all at the same time. And any of you that know Deputy Secretary Hicks, that's what you're going to get. And she's right. I would say to caveat off what Simon's saying internally, if you look at just a couple things in our own country right now, in 2008, our country stopped having kids. Those of you that have looked at that problem, to the point where we're going to start seeing 20% less 18-year-olds hitting the labor market than we did 20 years ago. And that's not just going to affect the Department of Defense. That's going to affect companies like the one I was just in at Walmart or Comcast or Amazon that need a large frontline workforce. It's going to affect our colleges and universities who rely on that student base for their business models to come in. So that's one challenge that we're facing, is that we can't do things business as usual just for that reason alone. Immigration is 2 million people lower than it was prior, had it kept going at the rate it was going prior to COVID. We're not going to get there without figuring that problem out in our workforces. We got an aging workforce. If you look at the average age of workforces across the country, in our civilian workforce in DOD and the defense industrial base, if you talk to the Undersecretary of the Navy or others, and this is a broader problem than just the Army, obviously, they'll say that's what's keeping them up at night is shipbuilders and submarine builders in a lot of this, because we're going to build more in the next few years than we have in the last 30 years. And then we have a 60% labor market participation rate. So you add this up, and it's in the War College. It's a VUCA. It's a complex problem. We have 3.4 million of us in the Department of Defense. If you count the uniformed services, the total force, you count the civilian component, you count the contractor component. That's not counting the defense industrial base, and we're all just one actor in the labor market. And we can't break the labor market just for our own needs. So we've got to think, much more broadly than that. And I know, I'll just say that's some of the challenges that we're facing to tee up as part of the discussion. I know we'll get into some of those solutions as well.
Well, that's great. So I'm going to give it to Kenny, because I think, having that, so let me get this straight. We have got less babies, we have a smaller workforce, less of them are participating, fewer immigrants. We're all competing, for that same talent. But on a call last week, you said maybe it's not such a competition, especially for the reserve component.
Yeah, so let me add to the problem statement, and I'll finish with a vision. Statistics here. If people didn't know, historically, in the history of our nation, only 41 million people have served in the whole history of our entire nation. Half of those were in World War II, about half. Since we went to the total force 50 years ago, only 11 million people have served. That's about 2 million per year. You add up the total veteran force now, it's less than 6% of our nation has served. I view that as a problem, right? So here's my vision statement. How do we solve this problem? We have to reframe our nation's vision. And it starts where, as a nation, we have to say we must inspire and energize service to our nation. Let's start there. To accomplish this, the entire system in our culture has to evolve, the entire system and culture. And it starts with that statement, the war for talent. That treats it as a zero-sum game. If we treat it as a zero-sum game, the military for sure will lose that game. All right. So how do we reframe collaborating across industry, the government, and military, evolving the system and culture so that we can attract in various ways our civilians into a service of nation mindset and serve in various ways so that we can bring talent in to the workforce here.
Thanks, Kenny. Sir, do you have something? Nope, just want to check.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're talking about the same problem here. It seems to me if it's a supply and demand challenge, this, and in order to have an efficient market for talent, you need to have an interchangeable currency. So one of the things we're trying to do in the British Army is to redefine Army skills using civilian terminology, civilian language, so we can start to trade these on the civilian market. And that might seem like an obvious thing to do, but unless you do that, we're talking different languages some of the time. So I think treating it as a supply and demand exercise is at least one way of getting closer to bringing people together there.
100%. On that note, we at NetCentrics, one of the problems we face, we actually have about 28% veterans serving at NetCentrics, both current and retired, separated. And the transfer of skills is a problem because on one hand, on the corporate side, we spend a lot of money certifying people in various cybersecurity skills or AI, et cetera. If they were to transfer over and show interest in the Army, they would have to probably restart from the beginning, where they could probably teach the courses, advanced courses. And so there's a problem there in that redefining. That's part of the systemic change we have to change.
So we have this great cry in the Army Reserve, let them take the test without doing the course.
Yes.
Please.
Yes.
And they'll pass the test. Well, if they pass the test, that's great. You've saved some money and time.
Absolutely.
Speaking of that, so Sir General Donahue, skills, civilian skill sets, what's out there? What do you see as things that you would want to bring into the Army from an operational perspective that you can, out in this audience here, the soldiers that we're bringing in, what sort of things should we be working on, and what is the risk of us not going after those skill sets?
Classic general answer here. Hey, before we talk about that, I want to talk about something else. Hey, I do think, and I'm going to throw out complete wild card, and there's a couple guys back there know that I will exactly do this. I think we have to reframe. I think, Kenny, what you said, what your three comments, right, and then you take the skill sets. We probably have to reimagine our active duty and reserve, not National Guard, because that's they do a different job, different capability. But we probably have to really go back and reimagine how do the reserves and active duty really work together. And I'm not going to throw out my idea. We tried an idea in another organization with this, but I'd love to, Jody, after this, just kind of go over that with you because, big shock. I also think it's a good idea. But I think it'd be very powerful, and it kind of goes into the true integration of how we would do some things going forward. Anyways, but going back to the question, Kelly, is that so the first thing is where are we at? We just talked about all this inflection point. Whirlpool made mortars, World War II. So what you all can bring to the capability is, and I know this is an unclassed environment, but if you look at what the United States military is doing to support Ukraine, and you look at what we're learning, right, you have the skill sets of everything that we're adding. We don't, right? In 18th Airborne Corps, we have to put everybody through a data course. Okay, now the young kids coming in, they got it. But really, realistically, major and above, you got to retrain them for how we're doing business now, not the future now. You already have that, right? So if we brought you in, you would actually be a more capable. So if you think that data is going to be, I'm just telling you right now, data is the way we are fighting now, okay? There are members of my staff that when they come in and do the initial counseling, they have to tell me, what is your warfighting function data plan to support operational design, current ops, and how we use data today? For a lot of them, it's like, oh my God. And I tell them, oh, by the way, your potential to serve in the military is probably going to be dependent on how well you figure it out. Here's the data course you got to go to. You all could come in and look at it, solve the problem, and move out with that right now. Okay? That's just all the warfighting function inputs, G1, G2, G3, G4, right? And then you talk about, well, whenever you go to combat, how are you going to very quickly and rapidly develop new algorithms to solve a problem, because everything we're putting into the cloud, who's going to write that algorithm? Who are they going to trust to say, yes, you can operate that algorithm in my cloud and trust it to protect it, right? Well, if you say, I went to Drexel and I did this and everything else, people go, oh, I probably want to listen to you. Donahue, oh, I wrote code as a freshman at West Point. I don't know anything. You're not doing it. You know what I'm saying? You will be the people that people will trust to actually assume that risk, because it's risk, right? Who's going to be able to, on the fly, hey, we now need to integrate all these UAVs because we had a bunch destroyed and we're now just using whatever ones we can get. Who's going to integrate that in so that you can actually see the feed and you can see where it's flying so you don't fly an Apache into it? I mean, that's the reality of where we're at. And you're taking these old systems, current systems, and future systems and trying to cram them all together in this data environment with people who have never done that. You're the answer. No one else can, right? That's why we want 75th Innovation Command to be part of 18th Airborne Corps. So, I can make blood come out of your eyes and ears on this, but you're the only people that can do it. And it's not the future. Everyone keeps saying the future. It's like, no, it's today. Okay? It is today. I guarantee you when you tear apart what happened, what Hamas did, it's going to go back to just simple everyday basics probably were missed, and then something else that a tech could have solved it, right? And then it goes back to people, right? These new forms of mass that are out there, everybody is using. Everybody can be seen. The traditional forms of mass matter and are just as important as they've always been. We've just added new, right? So the world just got more complex. We've added more capability that you're going to have to integrate. And we need other things to solve how to synchronize. algorithms should solve things for us with synchronization. We should be lowering the cognitive burden, not increasing it when we do this. And you all will be critical in all that.
So it makes you think. So, Kenny, I want to throw over to you with the tech background, all the integrations and companies you have to work with, buying someone else's code, open source, some of the components you have to put together in terms of people and technology, thinking about the problems you're hearing now, like what can the Army do? What sort of things can you think about to kind of really help us, help ourselves, and what General John said, this synchronization, this opportunity before us?
Well, the comment I made earlier about systemic evolution, cultural evolution, part of that, though, is not reinventing the wheel. So I think there's some low-hanging fruit that we can take advantage of. SkillBridge, huge fan of SkillBridge, the program as a whole. I love bringing in new talent for 6 months. They're highly motivated, ready to learn, and ready to contribute. Why don't we have a reverse SkillBridge, right? Bring in the necessary skills that we need in AI, cyber, other hard-to-fill areas where talent is there, just not here, and give them an opportunity to serve for 6 months. Combine the medical corps concept of short coursing them through basic, giving them a uniform, giving them the job to do at the right level, whether it's at a senior NCO level or a colonel level, doesn't matter, and then allow them to contribute for 6 or 12 months. You may find that they want to stay as well.
So you've opened it up to on some of where the cops will go into our second, but let's just go into the second part of this anyway. So I know we talked about, sir, just kind of like how the integration happens, how you're doing it in the British Army. Talk to us more about what you're thinking about towards the future, sir.
That word integration is a difficult word, I think, and I guess we've run with a definition of integration for the last 10 years through the rather difficult epoch of counterinsurgency campaigning in the Middle East that means reservists must achieve the same standard as their active counterparts. And of course that is right and proper for that sort of operation when the numbers involved are relatively few, when you can program and you've got lead times sufficient to generate and mobilize your reservists to do that. But of course, in the real world, when we're back to core business, which is warfighting, we cannot integrate in that way. It's just not possible to get the same kind of training output from a part-time reservist who has a full-time job. Not all do, but we have to assume that they have full-time jobs. We can't get the same out of that in peacetime. So we're rethinking what this word integration means. It does not mean homogenization. I think it certainly means at the time and place and point of use, your force elements, whether they are this workforce type or that workforce type, whatever, are properly integrated. But on the supply side, we have to have a properly differentiated model that recognizes the differences between workforce types. And that sounds like a really obvious and simple task. But believe me, when you come into contact with regular-centric culture, where integration often means do it all the regular way, it is really challenging, very challenging.
You know, to talk about culture, so we talked about this on the call earlier last week, and Sir Australia missed that, but for me, culture, you know, every organization has a culture, whether you like it or not. The question I ask is, was that culture intentional? And then ask yourself again, is that the culture that you need to move into the future? Because normally what you have is a culture that got you through the past. So I'm going to ask this, Mr. Parmeter, I have to throw the policy piece on you though, but many of us in the reserve component, and many in this room, I'm one of those. So just 2 years ago, I was a TPU reservist, brigade commander, doing my thing at PayPal, having a good time on weekends, summer, and I got asked to come on active duty, so I come right back on the active duty side. Permeability. How can we find a way? Is it the right thing to do? How could we do it? Because culturally, your active component. Oh, you want to go to the reserve? Okay, we'll see you later. We call it transitioning in the Army Reserve or the National Guard. You're going to transition over, as General Jan says, a soldier for life piece. But is it really a soldier of life? Oh, I can't go back to the active component? Oh, well, I need you because I got to mobilize. Oh, now you want me back. So a question I have is from a permeability perspective, how does the DoD look at that, and how do we change the culture where there is no lines of where you're at, and for the right purpose, right task? How do we get there?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one that I think there's an answer organizationally of what we want it to be. There's an answer of what it is in our own experiences as individuals. I would say that the concept of permeability has effects beyond just the sake of doing things in a permeable way for the fact of an individual. We are, right now, permeability doesn't work so well for active components. It just doesn't. It doesn't work. It works fairly well in the reserve and the guard, but from the individual being permeable between two different environments. But we don't recognize or incentivize those two worlds overlapping more. And we don't treat it as a force multiplier, if you will, for the individual. A couple of further points on that. Being more permeable would probably do more to help us with recruiting. I'll just segue for a moment and say, if military service is this pen, and we have sold this pen for 50 years, we haven't changed our product essentially in 50 years from the all-volunteer force. And at the time they asked, who serves when not everybody serves? And then we kept selling this pen and saying, we need you to buy this pen. Your parents bought this pen. Your grandfather bought this pen in World War II. You need to buy it. Well, right now people are saying, I don't want to buy that pen, whether you're a civilian or in the military, in uniform. And then we say, well, you're dumb if you're not buying this pen. And anyone that runs a business knows that's not how to get more customers. Or we say your parents, teachers, and coaches didn't teach you to buy this pen. But what we're not doing, and you can do three things when your product's not selling. You can change your market, you can change how you're branding or positioning the market, or you can change your product. And we're not doing the last one as well as we probably could, which is ask everyone, what would it take for you to buy this pen? And when you do ask that, you come back to things like permeability. And you say, how do we blend the experience of what it means to be a civilian and what it means to be in uniform a little bit closer together? Maybe that's a new product. The concept of permeability a little bit further, and riffing through that a little bit more, we culturally and permeability are two different things. When we got out, I got out 10 years ago, and when I did, I didn't know who I was out of uniform, and I had to figure that out. But I expected, because everyone told me that's the way it's going to be, is that I would move into a position relatively lateral to whatever I had in the military. Flip that for a second. If I spoke at the Worldwide J4 conference a couple months ago at DLA, or a couple weeks ago at DLA, and I asked all of the 2 and 3 stars, I said, why can't we bring very professionalized logisticians who do distribution or transportation or whatnot for some of the world's best companies and solve these big problems and bring them in laterally into our formations? And you would have thought the world was going to stop spinning on its axis and we were going to hurtle into the sun. But we expect it the other way around. So until we accept that culturally, that there is value to be gained for integration, because we're going to have to do it on the battlefield, to General Donohue's point of view, we're going to have to do it. We're going to have to bring the skill sets in. I'll finish by saying we're trying to change the culture just through some initial pilots right now. We're working with one of the Fortune 500 companies. The Marine Corps signed up to do it first, so we're going to go with them. I'd love to do it with the Army as well. As soon as possible, and the other services, but we're going to take 5 people, non-commissioned officers and officers, and instead of treating a like training with industry type thing, or like we normally do, which is in lieu of a senior service college, you send someone to go work at Apple for a year and then come back as an example. We want to treat it like we do with our foreign military programs, where we say, let's build organization relationships with the best resource we have, which is people, and develop interoperability and understanding and cultural alignment through that. So we're going to treat it as an assignment for 1 year, where we're going to take somebody, assign them to a company, and they'll do work there, and we're going to bring in people and assign them for 1 year, civilians, not to the same jobs, different jobs, and see if we can't get some data and some information that shows that bridges the civil-military divide. Does that give us confidence in the capabilities of others than our own silos of culture? And see how that goes. And then we're working with another company on, and this is where I've asked General Daniels to step up and see if she'd be willing to participate in this, is we did a skill level 1 crosswalk when I was at Walmart of what a frontline worker at Walmart had to do and what a frontline person in the Army or the Marine Corps has to do. Because in those two services you have leadership responsibilities at a lower rank.
than the Navy and the Air Force. There was about an 80% congruence in the skill level 1 tasks between those two populations. So why can't we take somebody into the service and then bridge them over to another career, and then they do that for a year or two, then they come back over, but what they did over here counts for promotions because the leadership training and the experiences they have will resonate, and then they bounce back, and that in of itself becomes a new product that we can sell for recruiting. So all these things are connected. I know that's a long answer, but I think it's a logic model that if we collectively tug on, we might be able to get some traction with.
And Kenny, you're chomping the bit because we talked about this a little bit. Like magically, it happened over a couple of days where the DoD's looking and saying, "We could do this." Tell us more about what you were thinking, because along those lines, some of the pilots and things you're thinking of, just from your perspective.
Yeah, it's the whole concept of taking a sabbatical without losing momentum, right? So I love the one-year program concept, and I'm glad DoD's finally off on that path. I think that longer term, we need to turn that into a 3-year program where everyone, or some percentage, is required to go into corporate and learn, bring that skill set back, recruit while you're out there as well. And then, because it's part of the promotion system, no one's going to get penalized by doing that. So I think that's a longer term where we evolve the program that you just spoke of. Another, I'll call it low-hanging fruit. Anybody here from the U.S. Army Cyber Center of Excellence or attached to it in any way? None? Wow. Oh, there we go. All right. So love the Center of Excellence. Love what you guys do there. With all of that excellence in one spot, one of the areas I think we can improve is the incorporation of civilians in the training part of it. So very good linkages with academia, et cetera. I'm trying to find younger talent to bring in to the government side, maybe even the military side. But bringing them in for your training programs and establishing those connections and those relationships with the government military going through that program, any one of those programs, I think is a low-hanging fruit that we could absolutely capitalize on. Cross-pollination.
But not only that, we should bring in, I think the problem with 1 year is, right, for families, that's tough. 2 years, I think just a suggestions are for as you go forward. But why not bring in industry? It should be like a prisoner exchange, right? Yep. Hey, you get this person, yep. We get this person, right? And somehow, you got to figure out salaries or whatever. But we could figure that out. But, I think it'd be pretty amazing just to see where it goes. Do the prisoner exchange.
Yeah, we looked at that with the companies, and having been on the other side, at Walmart, we hired 80,000 veterans and military spouses a year. And we brought them in at all levels, from logisticians, cyber, everything. Right now in the Department of Defense, we have 150,000 cyber positions, uniformed and civilian, going back to cyber, and 30,000 vacancies. So there's more vacancies in the Department of Defense than there is in Fortune 1's entire tech organization. And we're not going to get there without these types of exchanges that we can do. I think the ability to bring, the talent is there. The talent is there for us to achieve our needs. The talent wants to find purpose, value, and meaning, but it's the ability to have it be accessible to us and us accessible to them. This is not policy whatsoever. I'm just throwing this out for the sake of discussion. If we were to say you couldn't become an SES or a general officer unless you had that experience that Kenny and I just described, that is not policy. That is not on the table right now. But it's things like it. Think of it as the new extension of what it means to be joint qualified. There's not a unrealistic precedents out there that we could explore with this, and then we grandfather it in and see how promotion boards work and reward and incentivize organizations and people accordingly. But I think those are the types of things we have to do to get where it's not going to be business as usual. We cannot optimize the way we always do things and fix this problem. It has to be fundamentally different to get there.
Yep. So here, General Donahue, you're going to go to Apple for 2 years.
2 years, maybe 3.
Dominate the world, come back, be a 4-star, right?
And bring half of the employees with you when you come back.
I love this new policy he just made.
It's the new joint. You heard it from right here on the first stage there. So let's switch a little bit, and I do want to get folks ready to kind of take some questions because I see some people are like, oh, I want to talk about something. So we do have microphones in the center aisles. Folks can just feel free to stand up and jump right in. I want to make this even more dynamic because otherwise Simon will smack me and I'll lose my dynamic title. But Sir Major Graham, so you're hearing this and you hear like, oh, right on the fly, the U.S. is trying to figure out how do we do this. And I'm sure in the U.K., similarly, and some of our Five Eye partners are in here. We've talked about this as well. What else? What else can we do in an effort to get after this talent, bring it in, and what other barriers you think we need to tackle? And we can start right here and talk to each other about it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that the idea of bringing folk into the Army, it doesn't take long before you start running up against things like fitness and appearance and facial tattoos and stuff. These are all surmountable, but in some of the more specialist and information-oriented capabilities, you then start getting into vetting and security, reliability, and all of those sort of things. So I don't suppose those are different challenges at all. I think it boils down to, attract and retain. What is it from the civilian workforce that would attract them to take part in the Army? And I don't know whether it's that complicated, really, because it's the reason I'm here. It's the reason we're all here to some greater or lesser extent, and that's about doing something different. My colleague from Australia talking about getting cyber reserves into the reserve, allowing them to do stuff that might not be legal in their civilian sector. Well, that's quite attractive, one would imagine, to some. But of course, how do you market that? It's very difficult.
Come do illegal stuff.
Yeah.
But I want to riff off the attract and retain. And if we have permeability, then what does retention really mean? And maybe it's not necessarily retain, but expose. Have familiarity, have that, and how does military service for a couple of years at a mid-grade level for us then translate into a civilian industry promotion as well? So, that again, it's back to permeability, and how much do we need to retain, and how much can we permeate in and back out so that, what is the average career? How long does the average person be in any particular job? And how often do they switch corporations? So, maybe they switch to the Air Force or to Walmart or then to PayPal and then back into the Navy. I mean, we don't see careers like that very often, but maybe we could really learn a lot from having people that are able to successfully navigate those and progress through those different experiences.
And I think that's like from an adaptability perspective as well, because as we change, our structure tends to change in terms of 5 to 7 to 8 years, where the technology is now moving every quarter. It's faster and faster. So how do we, structure or maybe have our talent do that for us? So it's like, hey, I'm going to move here to make those changes. I know Mr. Parmenter had something to say there.
Yeah, I was just going to say there was this program between about 1964 and 1970 when we were looking at. Everyone thinks we wanted to stand up an all-volunteer force for the sake of standing up an all-volunteer force, but it was really not, that wasn't the problem. It was how do we not do a draft? And then the all-volunteer force came about, and there was a Gates Commission that really is the standard as you look back that created all of the models that we largely use today in the creation of that all-volunteer force. You take that combined with how you look at most of the Fortune 500 companies that have about 250,000 people or more, 100,000 or more, and they'll either have a model where they recruit themselves out of a bad retention problem or they'll retain themselves out of a bad recruitment problem. And we don't necessarily think of it like that because we see ourselves as the only actor in the marketplace in many cases. The ability to do a little bit of both through permeability and change what the experience means to serve, and going back to that question of who serves when not everybody serves, which is how they figured out how to come off of the draft, and then the all-volunteer force was the result of that outcome. But to what General Daniels was saying, this concept of retention versus you have to inform, inspire, and attract first, then you can recruit and hire, then you can develop and employ and retain, and those variables all have to be conditions that you meet at each one of those stages of the talent management life cycle. But it's the answer, I think, is going to be found in how we look at the reserve component and then expand out from there. and we pilot within the reserve component and expand out from there in a large part of this with the active formations and with the civilian workforces that we have.
Awesome. So here's the rules going to go from here. Most folks that know me, I'm not really about rules. I like the whole illicit activities kind of thing, so I want to go talk to you later about how I can do some illegal stuff. But I'm going to start with Roger Dion in the back. So please tell us who you are. Question you can answer. You can ask individuals here or the panel itself, but I just want to make sure, open to anybody. So please, this is your time to ask some of the folks here. We've assembled such a great panel. I want to make sure we get the most out of it. So Roger, you want to start us off?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Panel, thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation. My name is Roger Dion. I'm the Commanding General of Army Reserve Aviation Command. I command 229 aircraft, 5,000 soldiers, and we're deployed around the world since the last 23 years. I'm very proud to have been a TPU member since 1987. I really want to pull the thread of the pen. We ask our TPU, our reservists, we ask our direct commissionees coming from the civilian force to become that pen. But I can't see the superpowers, General Donahue, on the SRB. Two-time non-select is a real thing. And we have direct commissions being two-time non-selects. Because they, even if they buy the pen, sir, what if they don't fit into the pen case perfectly? And the permeability makes it an exceptional challenge. Healthcare for the reservists and going back and forth on and off orders, I wonder after 38 years, can I ever just have health care? Because it's hard going back and forth. My family has to figure that out often. I guess my question is, in order to change the pen, we have to identify how we make it possible to succeed. Great ideas, the permeability, but promotion boards still happen. So my question is, how can we make it so that when they do arrive, whether it be TPU or active duty, regular Army, how can they still succeed? Because even when we take our greens through the skills bridge program that you mentioned, sir, even industry doesn't necessarily start outside of executive level. They don't start the military at the highest level. CSP sometimes still starts you at an entry-level engineer, maybe a level 2 engineer. They don't make you the CFO on day one. And we're trying to figure out how to bring in top talent into mid and upper grades, and how do we make sure that they can succeed? And that is our wicked problem. I think we can attract them. How do we retain them, and how do we take care of them when they arrive, is my question, sir.
Yeah, can I jump in on that?
Sure.
That's a great question and great points. I don't know that any one of us individually has the answer. It goes back to cultural. There's this question, it's rhetorical, and it generally offends half the people in the room when I ask this. So if it has that effect, then I guess it's achieved its purpose. But can senior leaders change a system into something that wouldn't have picked them? And that's a hard question to ask. And I don't know where the right answer to that is. But I know that we're going to do, over the next year, a series of tabletop exercises followed by pilots with about 25 functional communities across the Department of Defense. And I would love to have the people in this room in those tabletop exercises helping us answer that question. So we're going to facilitate the answer to it, and I would just ask if anyone wants to be a part of it. Andrea, can you stand up? So there's Andrea, and the two people next to her are on the team. She just got out of the Coast Guard, 06, a new member of my team. And Katie Roberts right here, who used to be Secretary Shinseki's press secretary when he was there. And this team, we're running these tabletop exercises, and we'd love to have the service there. So to answer the question, I don't know what the answer is, but I bet you we could all figure out at least a least worst option answer to that question.
Roger, if I could, and then, so this goes back to, we talked all about culture. Well, culture is great, but culture is only as good as the person in charge. And when that person leaves, the culture can get better or it can get worse. It's process. You're talking about process, right? How do you make it real to the person who's saying, man, I got a family, I got a job, whatever the deal is, right? And how do you make that? That's why I think we have to reimagine the active duty, because that's how you have to have jobs for people to actually go to, right? Otherwise, hey, I come in, I'm going to do this for a while, and then if I'm part of this formation, how do I jump out of the active portion and jump over to the reserve portion, and I still have a way forward? Then you can jump back. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of where, if I think we want to do this for real, that's what we have to do, right? Because no matter what, if you're, you know, let's be honest, you're going to come in, you're going to like it for a little bit, and then you're going to get bored, you're going to do whatever, or you're like, this isn't really what I wanted. I want to go back over to the reserve side where I was having more fun, I had more fulfillment, my family liked it, I can still deploy, or whatever you want to do, right? I think we have to be able to, you know, and then a new commander comes in, you have a relationship, hey, this is where I want to take the organization, I really need you to slide over to the active side. I need you here every day, right? So I think without that sort of thing, no matter what, we have to have a legit process for y'all, okay?
Hey, Roger, I want to narrow in on a very specific thing that you said. Well, first off, almost 28 years active guard and reserves, and I dealt with the healthcare issue. It's insane. It's insane. But as it relates to your point about, say, I'm a finance guy, I go in and I want to be a CFO, and there's not necessarily a one-for-one right off the bat. Here's what I do as CEO at NetCentrics, just because I understand what people make, and I make sure at a very tactical level I will never lowball an exiting service member. So I will always try to match at a minimum their salary that they had at a minimum. If not, obviously give them what they're worth in the role that we can put them in. So it's a very tactical thing that I can do at that level.
I'm going to switch over here to the right side here, patiently waiting. Please, who are you? And I feel like I'm on The Voice. It's great.
Thank you, sir. My name is Dr. Valerie DeVries. I am the G1 for the U.S. Army Tank Automotive and Armaments Command, and we have 13,000 people. And I do, in my civilian life, hire a lot of Reserve and National Guard people just like you into my civilian positions. So I'm very grateful for this room. Thank you very much. The question is for Mr. Parmeter. It's about permeability, and you've talked a lot about permeability. Specifically, I want to know a little bit more about civilian to civilian permeability. I have 6 organic industrial bases under my guidance, and we're wrestling with modernization and reskilling. You said something about cyber. 30,000 vacancies. I've gone to look at Cyber Reskilling Academy and cannot make heads or tails out of it. If I were an individual interested in going into a cyber career, I cannot tell how to do it. There's lots of beautiful mind maps. But what is step number 1? Perhaps they're all introverts and cannot do marketing and would much prefer.
Yeah.
I apologize. Do not take my iPhone away. So, sir, I'll repeat the question. What are your plans to encourage civilian permeability?
So do you mean permeability within the DoD civilian workforce from one job to another in DoD? Or
correct. And between services. If I'm Army, if I were to apply for a Navy job, I'm not sure if they want me.
They do.
Well, thank you.
Especially you. I'll tell you what we are doing, and I can't answer the question specifically. I'll try to, like General Donahue said, I'll try to answer something differently or change the topic. No, I won't do it. What I'll say is that we picked cyber as the first example of that, of what we're doing, these series of tabletop exercises and pilots. And we have this thing that we got through the Deputies Workforce Council in June called the Labor Market Framework, where it essentially says, how do you take and identify your talent pools, internal and external, and the internal is just as important as the external. How do you inform and inspire them to what are the opportunities in the future and what is the pathway it takes to get there, and then give them a sense of self-efficacy that the journey is worth their time from your current state to your future state to get to your point. And you have to have all those conditions met. So those first step is, how do you identify your talent pool? How do you work with third-party partners and intermediaries to extract that talent, kind of like farming and mining of raw materials? And then how do you convert that extracted material into that which has the features and characteristics that you need in your market? And we call that skills in the talent world. How do you have the skills that would be attractive and usable? And then how do you have an end-to-end system and bring those skills to market? And then your marketplace has to be something that's a user-centric experience. It's designed around the job seeker and the hiring manager, not the recruiter, and pull them in. And what we're doing is the first one of those tabletop exercises with the cyber community. It's going to happen on the 23rd of October. There's conversations going on now that Andrea and the team, we're all running with the CIO, CDAO, and DISA and Cybercom, because we wanted to go with the fourth estate, because then the principal staff assistant had direct control over that and we could learn a little bit more. But to your point, I'd love to invite you to that, and then I'd offer that we can do your workforce in the where we do a blended activity in one of these tabletop exercises, because I get to decide what sequence we're going to do it. I would offer, if you meet me afterwards, and we'll find a time to do your workforce and the cyber workforce together if we wanted to blend that as an example. Or we could pick another one and do a tabletop and a hiring pilot and measure the data and see what our conversion rates are and see what people are going to tell us back to how well they're willing to buy that pen or not in the process to get there. That's an offer publicly right now.
Thank you, sir. I shall choose my pen very wisely.
But I appreciate you standing up and asking the question, and two, stepping up and being part of helping us solve this solution. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Awesome. We're going to go over to the left over here, my left, your right. That's Major General Woff. Is that correct over there, sir?
Yes,
former RD commander?
That is correct. Yes. I spent a little bit of time as a career AG officer, and this is probably the most energizing panel discussion I've heard on this topic. That's the good news. And Brian, I'm looking straight at you, okay? Because I know the Chief of the Army Reserve and her brilliant deputy or assistant, Steve Austin, the $1 million guy right there. Every every general officer has general officer bright-eyed ears, gobies. And then they meet a reality that's not been mentioned in the room yet. We talked about bringing folks in at the GO level or flag officer level. World War II, William Knudsen of Ford and General Motors, Marshall did a direct appointment as a 3-star, lieutenant general, 0 military experience. But today, one of the challenges nobody's mentioned yet are 3 words: code, law, statutes. When I became the DCG of HRC, first one they had as a reservist, I heard a recent term that I'd never heard of, dates only back to about 1787, scrolling. We have arcane, painful legal hurdles. Prior administration, Secretary of the Army wanted to get after mandatory training. I was the chair of the Army Reserve Forces Policy Committee. Some good friends of mine were on the Reserve Forces Policy Board. Good news is this is familiar to all of us. Bad news is this is way too familiar to many of us. What can we do to basically do the decisive action at the political appointment level, Secretary of Defense, Undersecretary, service chiefs, to say, we've got to get this done, because we can have all the bright ideas in the world in the room, but if we can't get past the code, law, and statutes, we're just going to be stuck. Brian, I'm sure you got the solution for us right here.
Well, it's a tough one, because it's not just we can't do that by ourselves. When I first came in and did the listening tour and talked to each of the service MNRAs and then the vices and so on, they would say, everyone brought up, for instance, on the civilian side, OPM is the problem. And when you go talk to OPM and Director Ahuja and her deputy, and they'll point out and say, you have 84 direct hiring authorities across the Department of Defense for your civilian talent, and your utilization rates are abysmal. And so you're not using what you already have. So we have to do our own homework and do that which has been given to us. And it's not that we don't want to use them. It's when it starts to manifest itself down at the hiring manager and the HR specialist level, and it happens in the HRDs in the Fourth Estate and all the services. We have to clean our own ranks before we can go back and say, Congress, you're not helping us, or OPM, you're not helping us, or whatever that is. We've got to make sure that we are firing on all cylinders and using it, and then we can identify something that we need that doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that there's not problems. I'm not trying to sweep it under the rug, I'm just saying that's been the initial tone up front. There's an appetite in Congress, and there's an appetite in OPM and other organizations outside of our control to work with us and help us. But we've got to show up prepared and smart on the topics, not show up and come across somewhat as whiny.
So I want to hit this one as well. So the Army, all three components, has the ability to do direct commissioning. 2 years ago, I said, we're going to do some direct commissioning. I'm going to get me some of that. And the response from the Department of the Army G1 was, but you have no mission. Your mission is 0. Great, we're going to exceed mission. And so fortunately, working really well with the special operator, the SOF community, and working on civil affairs, we had some folks who, bless their hearts, endured 2 years before they were commissioned. But they stuck with the program. They wanted to do it. They wanted to become members of the Army Reserve. And with the special operations folks, we now have that down to closer to 6 months. And we did over 50 last year, and I think we're hitting closer to 100 this year. We've got engineers, civil affairs, logisticians coming in as captains and majors. We also happen to have an astronaut who wanted to join the Army Reserve. We could do her in 4 months. Just saying, when we want to do it, we can do it. So we have the authorities. We just needed to fix our processes to get it done. Our process for right now for direct commission is a disaster. But there are some communities who are making it happen and are helping us out and bringing folks in at the right levels. So we can get there. We just need to do better at it.
Now, she is going to hate me for this, but one of those 2-year folks is in the back of the room who's Miss Price right now, but is also Captain Price right back there. I can see her behind General Van Roosen. If she could stand up for a second. Is she back there? She was just there. Anyway, Captain Heather Price, is one of those folks who I talked to last year. Yep, there's the commission. That's right, you were. Absolutely. To another one.
Thank you for your persistence.
So we have the talent. We can do these things, and that took a lot of pushing on the system and getting through that scrolling process, mapping it all out, and understanding that, hey, the process has 46 steps, I think it is, 46 steps to be directly commissioned in the United States Army. And then you have to go through all the training. And I know, so we're going to fix that. And I guess part of the thing about the process, sir, is we can get through some process. We've got great engineers. How do we break that process down and to make that better, stronger, faster for what we want to do?
So to take that further, this is one example of many processes. I know I see some of my fellow P&R teammates in here and whatnot. If you look at the process steps it takes to get, I'll go back to civilian hiring because it's just an easy one to attack a little bit. And you say there's X number of steps and the average time to hire is about 100 days, plus or minus by service. And you can take 27,000 pages of rules and documents that we have to follow, and it takes about 100 days to get through that, 90 to 100 days within the department right now. But if we could take some of those process steps and slide them out of that and do it further left or upstream with a third-party partner helping us do some of those, if we could use technology in a more robust way where it's a binary 1 or 0 kind of decision process, and pull that in, that's exactly what we're going to do. Our goal is to get time to hire for the civilian workforce down to about 30 days in one hiring pilot for that workforce using the cyber accepted service and some other things. And there's rules for that. But this is a perfect example. What I would love to pull into our tabletop exercises, because what it does is it does what the Pentagon doesn't do well, is everyone sits in a room and nods and they walk out and they say, I'm not doing this. Or they'll say, well, let's wait this out. And this makes us really step up and try to combat those two things on the change processes. But
so what we did for the direct commissioning was I have a careers group, and there were a number of steps that were Army Reserve specific. There's HRC, G1, and then there's G1. And so anything else, I put it, Colonel, you are now in charge. Yep. Follow through these steps. So that would help us. That helped the process a lot. But because there was no single belt, there was no one following that was responsible for the whole process.
That's right.
So there was so that helped us quite a bit, finding out who that was. Great question, Watt. Okay.
Great. We're going to shift over to my right, your left. Doc.
Yeah, Brigadier General Bob Suter, Army Reserve and Army Medical Department. Just a couple, building on some of these comments, a couple other policy issues for perhaps comment or note-taking that I think are some challenges right now. Most of the general officers in this room remember a time when the majority of company grade officers on active duty had Army Reserve commissions. Back in my day, people, unless you were a distinguished military graduate or academy graduate, you got a reserve commission. That changed about 97, I believe, and I think that probably has hurt permeability. Of course, at that time we were the undisputed world power and didn't have any enemies anywhere. The other thing that has come up recently that I hadn't seen earlier in my career is that HRC has been disallowing comments about people's civilian job skills on OERs. And that is counter to this initiative as well. Whatever skills they are, whether they're cyber skills or whether they're other skills. I was senior rater recently to an officer who was a medical service corps officer but is in charge of distribution for North America for Amazon. We couldn't put that on his OER. So, those are the sorts of things that I think would be helpful to talent management, would be to try to allow some of these comments and bring some of the people's talents into the forefront. Thank you.
So I got to ask, sir, if you saw that on an OER and a reserve component soldier is coming, is that something that could help you in placing that person if they're coming back and forth, or is that something? How do we look at that? Because that is definitely something that, process and culture-wise, we just don't do today.
Yeah, I think. I don't want to get into OERs and what people really read on OERs. We got to be honest with ourselves there too. Like, I don't know if anyone would actually read that portion of it, right? For what you do now. You bet I want to know about that. Are you kidding me? Absolutely. I don't know if the OER is probably the vehicle to do that, but on the front of it, we should be able to allow people to say, hey, what are your unique capabilities? That's in there, right? So it should be in there, right? But the actual block checking and stuff, no one's going to read it, right?
Can I ask you? I'm going to ask you a related. How did you? So you found the civil affairs, the trained folk. How did you find other? How did it come to pass that you had information about other skills that were in the force that were supporting you?
I grew up in a soft environment, right? And just you're a lot more fungible in that environment. So I grew up seeing it, right? When I was the NSOC commander, you all have heard of Alexa? Okay. So the guy who was in charge of forming that, we wanted a chief technological officer, right? He's a naval officer. And we knew he was out there, so we cold called him one night and said, hey, I understand you have a naval commission. This is what we're trying to do in Afghanistan. This is who we are. I understand you're out there. Would you like to come out to Afghanistan and be our chief technological officer? It took us 1 month to get him, right? He worked for Apple at the time. He doesn't now, or Amazon. And, we had him, and we had him for 7 of the months I was out there. That fast, right? If you have a problem to solve, and we go back to, I obviously called it superpower earlier, you should be able to go out and just get that reserve person and bring them in for a time frame to solve the problem, right? And all this, all we wanted to do was get an app that we had a problem with checkpoints getting attacked in Afghanistan, right? And the Afghans don't, you're never going to be able to get it to that. All we want to do is give them a cell phone, just hit a button, I'm getting attacked. If you can fill out drop-down menu other stuff, and that automatically came back to our mission command system, we saw it right away, and we could vector something over, right? Because this was just decimating the Afghans at the time. He came in and he solved it, and 2 months later we had it, right? They were just hitting the button. We knew where the checkpoints were under attack right away. We could put something over top and very quickly, figure it out. And then you started getting patterns too, because you actually had a reliable reporting of where these attacks were happening. Okay, and you just, and then suddenly, you could go out and check on the Afghans and say, why does this checkpoint always get attacked? Well, we've crappy leadership here. Fire the leadership, right? Put new people in charge. Or you have a problem with the talent. Whatever the case was, it didn't matter, right? But it just opened the door for so much. An active duty person was never going to solve that, right? So that's the power of being able to do that.
We do have, in force education and training side of things, on the uniform side, there's work that's part of a fascinating, broader set of work called Learning and Employment Records and Digital Wallets, for those of you who have heard about it. And it's essentially, how do you take all of your knowledge, skills, attributes, and tasks and your competencies and package them into something that is the equivalent of a digital wallet? And that digital wallet will be a standardized skills taxonomy that the private sector and other folks are leaning into as much as the department now, so that you can then query that, and then you can assign or manage, or people can self-select into opportunities based off of the skills they think they could bring to a problem in an ever-evolving set of problems. And so if for those of you that are interested in that learning and employment record piece, it is something the department's looking at and trying to start pulling in over time.
Kenny, do you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to capitalize on what Chris and Brent were saying. LinkedIn, okay? So I'm currently, as Colonel Cushing, the senior military officer at CISA at DHS. I was discovered through LinkedIn. Like, in general, LinkedIn is a very powerful tool, and it's amazing how many military members, Reserve Guard, active duty, don't have a robust LinkedIn, and they should. And that's a really easy way to discover talent. It is a digital wallet equivalent, right? But it's through a very powerful platform, and networking platform. You should require people to have profiles on LinkedIn.
So I did not pay Kenny to say that, and I cannot promote LinkedIn in uniform, but all my staff members out there, is the first thing I ask is, look, I was head shaking over there, do you have a LinkedIn profile? Let me look at it. Well, that looks like crap. You should probably do something about that, because that's where people are going to go look for some talent pieces. So again, not trying to promote a platform, but I think that's too. And we've got I know this General Klein's back there from the 75th. We've got folks that write code that can scrape on social media, and quickly we could find that we've got an 88 mic specialist who has a master's in computer science, is a data scientist for a Fortune 500 company. And when you ask that person, like, well, you want to do some data science here? And they're like, no, I kind of like driving the truck. So this goes to the point of, like, knowing your folks. So matching the machine and having a human in the loop, as my FM team will remind me all the time, is making sure we kind of bridge that connection. But two, it's getting to that level of data, understanding the people portion of it, and then figuring out what the process or policies come to. I know, sir, you may have something as well.
Just to build on that, I think traditionally the first port of call within UK defence when requiring a particular niche or specialist skill was to reach for the wallet and go for a contractor. That was easy. You knew what you were getting and when you would get it and to what standard, but it was expensive. And of course, the missed opportunity that existed already in the force. So the next step was to say, we don't even understand what we have here. So we now require all of our reservists to declare digitally what they can do, and therefore, if the Army needs a underwater yak straddler, it can go to the database. Of course, this brings other issues into play. How do you assure that? Just because the reservist claims to be able to do this, that, or the next thing, can we rely on that? So the Army's tentacles sort of start to extend into that space a little bit. But unless you know what your people can do, you're never going to be able to maximize their potential, or even to start.
I'm going to go to one last question. So I'm sorry, Kirk, but the person who stumbled upon me when I was a young major and said, you should probably come over to KPOC. So General Van Roosen, if you would, sir, the last question of the morning.
Thank you very much. General Graham, interesting you talk about the classification. There was a U.S. Army personnel system that was put into place in the 90s, before some people here were born, that actually automatically declared that every reserve soldier was an underwater sponge diver. And you had to change it from that to something else. I remember going through that for months to stop having entire companies of underwater sponge divers. But I'm wondering if we have any of those left. So the question that I had today was actually two-part, and to put myself in perspective, I was Deputy G1 of the Army once upon a time working for General McConville. I also spent time as the Deputy Commander of the Special Warfare Center and School, at which time I developed for General Cleveland, the Army Special Operations Commander at the time, something called the Military Governance Program, 38G or GOLF, which speaks to, I think, much of what we're talking about today, which is bringing those civilian skills into military capabilities. where that was some time ago has changed considerably to where it is today, and the vision of that has changed a little bit. But as the current president of the Civil Affairs Association, I'd be delighted to hear, particularly looking at you, General Daniels, where that's at. And if I could, General Graham, we were partnered with the UK at the time to do much the same thing, bringing civilian skills into the service of your service as well. And I'm curious where that's gone in the last 5 years. So thank you.
I think what has moved quite quickly in that time frame is understanding the demand and expressing the demand in a way that the supply side can respond to. Because if you can't do that, you cannot communicate. You can't define the requirement. And I think for that, it requires a single body to oversee the supply side and the demand side at the same time. And this is where I think we're making some progress in enabling those skills to come into the Army.
So for the 35 Golf, I'll defer to Isaac Johnson, but we've done a great job with the proponent has really helped us out in terms of having a team that will review and hold boards on a regular basis in order to do those direct commissions so that we're not doing the 3-year folks, we're getting down to something closer to 6 months. So they have really stepped up and have helped us out, and we brought in a lot more captains and majors, really filling a gap in the civil affairs community over the last couple of years. And we use that model to help explain to the other proponents how to do a board, how to help us out, how to get past zero up to greater numbers.
And so I can add offline a couple more things there, but it's so well to the point where the engineers reached out and said, hey, because the NDA of 2019 provided all the Center of Excellence that, yes, you should, and the word not must, but you should stand up a direct commissioning program that allow you to access that talent in the civilian workforce and bring them in. And since many of the times it's, for the active component, it seems natural for the reserve component, but the active component is looking at how do they do that for other MOSs and other branches. So if we take it offline, I will tell you from a 38 Golf perspective, some of the talent that I'm seeing, incredible. PhD level, a master's level, folks that are professors and our folks down at Liberty and JSOMA. We have one of the folks there just offered a commission who's one of the professors there for JSOMA. So that's the level of talent. I just think now from a process perspective, how do we refine that so it doesn't take even 6 months? How do we get that down to where you're holding a board and 3 months later that person's heading to Fort Moore for the direct commissioning course? So with that, what I'd like to do first of all is, can I get a hand for our panelists here? I mean, this is an amazing set of folks. And for just having a quick, Teams call to talk about this, thank you all so much for letting me kind of riff, because this is not what's in the script here, and I'm not a big scripted guy. So, ma'am, I'm going to throw it over to you, because I know you're also not a scripted person.
Not much. So I took my script and I threw it away. So again, thanks to the panelists. I thought we had some really interesting discussion. The intent was to talk about civilian acquired skills. How do we bring them into the force? How do we look at different models? We've had some great discussion about interoperability. What does that mean? What does permeability mean? How do we get after it? How much do we need? Because we do need careerists in certain areas, and we do need those that come in and out. And so there's a balance in there. There's a trade-off as to which positions you allow to have that permeability and which ones you probably shouldn't, because you need to have that deep expertise. I mean, you look at your medical fields. There's certain skills you really need to have that, you're not coming in and out of positions. You really have that deep expertise. Our warfighters, you really need to have that deep technical, tactical understanding that goes up through the operational and the strategic. That's not something you just gain by doing it once here and there. You kind of need to have it. But there's others that you can have that broader perspective. So there's, a lot of different questions on that front. I think it was great, panelists. I want to thank you all yet again for joining us, and thank the audience for coming in and being a part of this as well. So thank you very much.
This concludes the Chief of Army Reserve panel. Please join our exceptional panel members to thank them for their attendance, and remember to take your origami Army Reserve product.